Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I personally suspect that Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli paratrooper, former Israel's ambassador to the United States, former deputy minister, drives like he stole the car. We found him driving somewhere in Israel today, and he's been pulled over, and he's talking to us from somewhere. Were you moving at the speed of the posted speed, Dr. Oren?
I was well below the posted speed because the traffic jams are back in the state of Israel. That's pretty normal. You know, we have 4 times the traffic density of the United States of America.
What?
Which is not good. Yeah. 5 times, 4 times. And it costs us, by the way, billions every year in lost work hours, people in traffic jams.
Well, you need talk radio there. Do you have talk radio the way that America has talk radio?
We actually have probably more talk radio. Just about every station is talk radio, and everyone's talking. But yeah, radio is a powerful instrument here, just for that reason. We're in the car an awful lot.
Oh, then I've got to penetrate the Israeli market. Dr. Oren, I appreciate you joining us early. Let me explain to my audience. Usually we get Dr. Oren with 7 minutes to go at the bottom of the Thursday first hour. But today I had Dwayne call him early because I opened up my Times of Israel this morning and I see a headline. High Court puts on hold extension of acting state prosecutor's tenure. Now, I follow Israeli politics pretty closely because they're our most important ally in the world, along with the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. They're also a very powerful ally in a very dangerous neighborhood, and they stand for freedom and elections. So I try and understand what's going on. No one in the United States understands High Court puts on hold extension of acting state prosecutor's tenure. Nobody. What's going on, Dr. Oren?
What's going on is really, my mother was a family therapist, and she used to always say that the presenting problem is not the problem. So here, the presenting problem is not the problem. The presenting problem seems to be about the tenure of a prosecutor who was appointed by a temporary justice minister, who was appointed by Netanyahu. Now, the temporary justice minister, a very fine man, Amir Ohana, and very interesting man. He's a gay rights activist and a member of the Likud and a former high-ranking officer in the IDF, only in Israel, has been a staunch ally of Netanyahu in fighting the court's attempt to try him for various corruption charges and trying to delay it. It was Amir Ohana who moved to even have the Knesset suspended because of coronavirus so that they couldn't make legislation that would force Netanyahu to go into trial. So really the problem behind the presenting problem is not the prosecutor general, it's not the attorney general, it's the question of when Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to stand trial. And
there's another problem here. When I was in Israel last, and you and I met when I was there, I met with some other people who are activists who follow your, quote, high court. And I was educated to the fact that your high court makes our most activist court, our Warren court, look like a bunch of pikers when it comes to judicial activism. And I gather this is animating a lot of the conversations amid the new coalition. Is that correct?
It is indeed. And I've said on this program before that the big problem here is that unlike the United States, where you have 2 opportunities to influence the composition of the Supreme Court, like you vote for president, you vote for Senate, we don't have that. The justices on our Supreme Court are chosen by jurists overwhelmingly by sitting Supreme Court judges. So, do the math. If you've got a Supreme Court judge, he's going to choose a successor who thinks more or less like him or her, right? Not someone who thinks differently. So what you have is a Supreme Court that is stuck somewhere in the late 1980s, is operating about an Israeli public which has moved significantly to the right, and that movement has been expressed in the composition of the Knesset, which has moved significantly to the right. So you've got this widening gap all the time between the worldview of the Supreme Court and the politics of the Knesset. And then on top of all that, you have an activist Supreme Court, which goes back to Supreme Court President Aaron Barak in the 90s. And his logo was everything is judiciable or adjudicable, everything. Including, for example, whether the Israeli government can or cannot return the bodies of Hamas terrorists.
Wow.
One time the government said it wasn't going to return the bodies because Hamas has the bodies of our soldiers. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that.
Okay, so we've got
Supreme Court saying that.
We've got this out of control high court, and we have a new coalition, which I call the Humpty Dumpty coalition. It fell off the wall, but they put it together again, and Gantz is in it, and somehow it's coming together.
Not so fast, but okay.
All right, so that's what I wanted to get to. Where are we? And would you, again, we got Steelers fans listening. I asked for extra time today so that you could do the primer. After 3 elections, finally Gantz said uncle, or he actually said, I'll be a patriot and join the government and get past this impasse. Where are we? I thought they had amended the basic law and were moving forward to allow the bigger Norwegian, whatever it is, to take over.
Well,
What's going on?
I'm glad you remembered that. I should give you a quiz every week after I talk to you. You remembered the Norwegian law. That's arcane. No, so what happens is that in order to actually move the legislation, it's a chicken and egg situation. First of all, they have to have a national coalition government. They haven't ironed out all the rubs, all the nicks in this coalition agreement moving forward. And as the corona crisis appears to be winding down, the raison d'etre for the national emergency government is also going to disappear. So it leaves Benjamin Netanyahu in a really ideal situation, win-win, because on one hand, he could go with this national unity government. National government will ensure that he remains prime minister while he goes to trial. Because remember, according to Israeli law, every minister must resign if he or she is indicted, except for the prime minister. But he has to appear as a prime minister in court, because any other minister he'll be forced to resign. So according to the rotation, Netanyahu goes first. He appears in court as prime minister. And should they ever come around to dealing with the Trump plan, they have a wide coalition for that as well. Okay, that'd be great. But if Benny Gantz and Benjamin Netanyahu cannot agree on a coalition government, and Israel in another 7 days, they have 7 days to put this together, will go to a fourth round of election, then Netanyahu goes to a fourth election, polling at an almost unprecedented 42 seats with no opposition, Hugh. None. Who's going to stand against him?
It would still be a high risk, whereas that which he has in hand is the reality of a victory. And so the question becomes, I just can't imagine. And they've got to get the West Bank. The chance of losing the West Bank in that election would be high, or at least it would be higher than if he took the deal that includes annexation. And this is what matters to American supporters of Israel. The West Bank annexation seems to me to be so obvious, and it's also going to be done in a fair way to the Palestinians, that it ought to be moved on quickly and effectively before we enter into the presidential season. Joe Biden, number one advisor, announced this week, Tony Blinken, who you must know well, Dr. Oren. I've only met him once.
And like and respect, yes.
Yeah, but he said he's against the annexation. And so basically...
He's in favor of the Iran deal. He's a lot of things that are against, that are contrary to Israeli policy.
So doesn't the new government want to move fast before American electoral politics intervene with Joe Biden and Tony Blinken against the coalition's stated policies and Donald Trump backing them?
Indeed. Certainly the clocks, there are a number of clocks on the wall. Annexation is one clock. The Iran nuclear deal is another clock. Should the Democrats win in the White House in November and renew America's support for the Iran deal, that deal is going to be expired in 5 years, in a mere 5 years. So there's a clock on there, too.
No, the appeasement, I don't expect you to take a role in this. You're an Israeli, not an American, but I can say the appeasers will be back in office if Trump loses to Biden, and the appeasers will be back in Tehran the next day. Dr. Oren, if they put together I have not seen any list of ministers. Is this hidden from public view, or is it just still like a poker game and they're just seeing and raising each other?
Yeah, well, the major thing is that this is the unprecedented number of ministers, 36 ministers, 16 deputy ministers. And under the Israeli law, neither ministers nor deputy ministers can advance legislation. So out of 120 members of Knesset, who's going to be actually left to vote? Virtually nobody. And not just that, at a time when nearly a third of Israelis are unemployed, this is going to cost the Israeli taxpayer hundreds of millions of dollars because the minister gets a bigger salary, gets a driver, gets a staff. It's immensely problematic. Given the alternative of not having a government at all, probably this would be preferable.
Now, I believe that they ought to send you to the United Nations in New York to try and explain to the world what's going on, because I believe, like Abba Eban before you, or our greatest ones, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, Jeane Kirkpatrick for the United States, that an articulate voice in the General Assembly is always an advantage. Have you decided, have you been asked, are you able to tell me anything about what's happening with Dr. Oren and the new government?
Nothing yet. Again, and as I said to you every week, if they called me to the flag, particularly to the UN flag, I'll be more than happy to report for duty and proud of it. But right now, my guess is that not everybody in the Likud, in the senior positions of the Likud, will be able to get a ministerial position, and Netanyahu is going to have to keep some diplomatic posts. in order to, pardon the phrase, to appease them.
But, I've got an Israeli friend here in the United States who says Israelis do not care about how the world views them. They don't listen to the explanations. They have wax in their ears. Why does it bother? It's a plum, as opposed to my view, which is you always got to win the argument. You've got to win the argument before you win the vote. Is that view spreading? Does that view have legs in Israel, that you've got to win the argument in the West in order to secure Israel's new position vis-a-vis the West Bank and with its emerging entente with its Arab allies, or de facto allies, I should say?
Unfortunately, your friend's view is the more regnant view today. And I'll explain why. Particularly among young Israelis, surprisingly, the young worldly Israelis who have seen, been abroad, they've seen America, they've seen Europe, they come back and they're kind of despondent, to tell you the truth. They seem to think that no matter what we say, particularly the progressive young people in America and in the West are gonna hate us no matter what we do. And so we might as well just say to hell with them and do what we want to do and put somebody who doesn't speak English in the UN. I mean, really, that's really it is very depressing. I hear it. And
that does not make sense because of me. I am the living embodiment of someone who's been influenced by your book Ally and by other books, by Abba Eben's memoirs, by The Redemption of the Unwanted. You've got to have people explain to dummies like me who can't read Hebrew and can only read the English editions of the Israeli papers what's going on. That brings me to the virus in Israel. 219 deaths, according to the Times of Israel, 85 people on ventilators, 15,870 cases, 8,400 people. That doesn't look bad to an American, Michael Oren. What worked there? It doesn't look bad to an
Israeli. It doesn't look bad. We handled this pretty well, and particularly because we are a disciplined society and a caring society, and we appear to come through it. Israel's come back to life literally as of today. But again, nobody knows the future.
I'm so glad you're in a traffic jam. I really am. That tells me you're back to normal. Now, tell me a little bit about the Israeli economy, because it apparently took just an enormous torpedo midships.
It did. Listen, the high-tech sector is going to spring back very quickly, and in many cases, the high-tech sector never experienced any downturn at all. I talk to people in the high-tech sector who are working 20 hours a day. Our biggest vulnerability is in tourism. And in wonderful restaurants we have, that's had a major hit, and these are huge industries here.
Now, the Israelis, I'll close with this, and this is an important question. The Israelis are used to living with risk, right? When I've been there, they've got rifles slung over their arms and they don't care. They walk around. Everyone knows that there's risk because there are terrorists in Hamas cells everywhere, and you've got Iran and Hezbollah over the northern border. People live with risk. Will they go back to the restaurants quickly, Michael Oren? Will they say, okay, we've got this, we understand there are treatments, there are interventions, there are ventilators, let's go have a drink?
I think they will. I think that resilience is our logo here. It's our brand name. And terrorist attacks that would paralyze cities around the world are forgotten, or not forgotten. They are overcome literally within minutes here. Life goes back to normal because that's what we've been used to, and that's what we've grown resilient. So I think it will spring back to life, and I hope quickly. The question is, are people going to come from abroad? There's a certain amount of element of Israeli tourism which is inelastic, Hugh, because this is a country which is holy to half of humanity. Right, the parking lot I am sitting in right now is holier than any other parking lot you're going to find in the West.
I've often said the most sacred space on the planet is in the tunnel next to the Holy of Holies. I've never been in a place like that, and I always tell my friends who are going to Israel, try and get into the tunnel next to the Holy of Holies. I went down there with John Bolton. It's just amazing.
Lot, which is also holy. So,
what's the parking lot you're in? What parking lot?
It's the parking lot I found. I'm pulling on the side, but it's in the Holy Land.
Oh, okay,
and
okay.
That is a land that is holy to half of humanity. So that's extraordinary. Right. That's people won't pass that up the way they may pass up a trip to Venice.
Yeah, I think you're right, Dr. Michael Oren, and I appreciate. I hope 7 days hence you're able to tell me that you're on your way to Turtle Bay, and that there is a government, and that the annexation is proceeding. And that the High Court is back in a box. I don't know how you put together a water authority, Mossad, and an IDF. How did you overlook the courts, Dr. Oren? Last question.
Yeah, country of the book. Well, I've been promoting an American-style reform of the Israeli Supreme Court, which will give the Israeli voter a say in how this court is put together, and the court will respond to public opinion and not be completely divorced from public opinion.
Dr. Michael Oren, always a pleasure. Follow him on Twitter at Dr. Michael Oren, and hope he shows up in New York soon.
Right.
Thank
you
you,
all.
doctor.
Be well, everybody. Bye-bye.